Someone tried to kill her before this story begins. Not with a weapon. With a phone call and a fake address and a road they knew she would have to walk alone. In January, 7 months pregnant. With no one coming and a battery that was already dying when she left her apartment. It was a clean plan. The kind that leaves no fingerprints. The kind that looks like an accident when the ambulance eventually arrives. Woman collapses in the cold. Baby does not survive. Tragedy. Nobody asks questions. Nobody points fingers. And the man who ordered it goes back to his glass office building and continues building his empire on the foundation of everything she built for him. And she is simply gone. It almost worked. The only thing that interrupted it was a black car that should not have been on that road. A driver who took a different route because his boss said so at the last minute for reasons nobody ever wrote down. And a man in the back seat whose world was built on silence and consequence and calculated coldness, who looked through his headlights at a woman on the ground and felt something move in him that he had spent 11 years making sure would never move again. He saved her life that night. And then, without entirely understanding why, he kept saving it. Over and over. In ways that had nothing to do with a road in January and everything to do with what was happening inside him that he did not yet have a name for. People in that city still argue about what really happened. The facts are clear. He came out carrying her. She survived. The baby survived. But nobody agrees on the why. Because this was not a man built for mercy. Stay? Because what comes next will show you exactly what kind of man he was. And exactly what she did to all of it. Welcome to Cross-World Romance Besties. If this is your first time here, you are in the right place. This channel is your home for dark romance stories where love does not arrive gently, where the most dangerous men carry the heaviest hearts, and where the women who find them are never, ever the ones who were supposed to. Please like this video right now, share it with someone who loves a story that refuses to let go, subscribe so you never miss what comes next, and drop a comment telling me where in the world you are watching from. I read every single one. Now, let the story begin. His name was Kang Siwon. In Seoul, that name did not need a title. It did not need a description or a warning or an explanation. It simply arrived in a room before he did, settled into the corners, changed the temperature, and waited. Men who had never met him adjusted their posture when his name was spoken. Conversations finished earlier than they were supposed to. Decisions that had been delayed for weeks suddenly got made. His name did that. Just the name. He was 34 years old and had been running the Kang syndicate since he was 23, when his father placed a gun on the table between them and said, simply, "It is yours now." Siwon had picked it up without hesitation. Not because he wanted power, because power was the only language his world had ever spoken to him, and he had decided very early that he would rather be the one speaking than the one being spoken to. The syndicate controlled 6 districts of Seoul. On the surface, it was legitimate businesses. Construction companies, logistics firms, 3 restaurants that never seemed to struggle regardless of the economy, a private security company that provided services to people who could not call the police for reasons they preferred not to explain. Underneath all of it, things moved that were never spoken about in boardrooms. Money that had no paper trail, decisions that had no minutes, and consequences that arrived quietly, without warning and without apology. Siwon ran all of it with a precision that his rivals found deeply unsettling. He was not reckless. He did not make emotional decisions. He did not drink too much or trust too easily, or confuse loyalty with affection. He had watched men built exactly like him get destroyed by all 3 of those things, and he had taken very careful notes. He had one rule above all others, and every person in his organization knew it without being told directly. You do not bring sentiment into this work. Sentiment is a crack in a wall, and cracks become doors, and doors let the wrong people in. For 11 years, that wall had held without a single fracture. On a Thursday night in January, something changed. Not loudly, not dramatically. The way the most significant things change, which is quietly, and from underneath, and in a direction nobody was watching. The meeting had run long. That was the first thing that went wrong. Siwon sat at the head of a long table in a private room above one of his restaurants, the kind of room that did not appear on any floor plan and was cleaned by people who had signed documents they understood without being told not to discuss. His second-in-command, a lean, quiet man named Park Juno, sat to his immediate left with a folder open in front of him that he had not needed to consult once. Juno knew every number in that folder by memory. He knew it because Siwon expected it, and Juno had long ago learned that Siwon's expectations were not requests dressed up as expectations. They were simply the standard of the room. They were discussing a problem. A man named Oh Tae-sung ran a competing network in the Eastern District and had recently made the extremely poor decision of moving 3 of his operations into territory that did not belong to him. Specifically, into the Mapo District, which had been under the Kang Syndicate's authority for 9 years without a single challenge. The fact that Tae-sung had moved during a period when Siwon's logistics division had been quietly restructuring was not a coincidence. Someone had told Tae-sung that the restructure meant distraction. Someone had suggested that the window was open. Siwon had not yet identified who that someone was. But he had filed the question, and Siwon's filed questions always got answered. He listened to the reports with the stillness he was known for. Not the stillness of a man who was not paying attention. The opposite. The stillness of a man paying such complete attention that movement would have been a waste of it. His hands rested flat on the table. His expression did not change. His eyes moved slowly from face to face as each man spoke, and when they finished he was quiet for a moment that everyone in the room understood was not an invitation to fill with more words. Then he said, simply, "Contact Tae-sung. Tell him I would like a conversation. Tonight." A newer man at the far end of the table, Shin Byam-soo, 8 months in the organization and not yet fully calibrated to the room's rhythms, made the mistake of asking what they should do if Tae-sung refused. Siwon looked at him. Just looked. The way you look at a question that revealed more about the person asking it than it asked. "He won't," Siwon said. Byam-soo nodded. He did not speak again for the remainder of the meeting. By the time they were done, it was past 11. Siwon's driver was waiting at the back entrance with the car already running at the exact angle that allowed Siwon to enter without breaking stride. This was not coincidence. This was the accumulated result of small discipline practiced for years, because Siwon believed, and had proven correct, that small discipline is what keeps large things from collapsing. He got in. He told his driver to take the route along the Han River. It was not the fastest route home. It was not the route he usually took. Something about the night, the particular density of the cold through the window, the way the city felt pressurized and close in a way he could not name, made him want the water. He did not examine the impulse. Siwon rarely examined his impulses. He simply acted on them, or he did not. And tonight he acted. In the car, heading toward the river, he thought about Tae-sung. He thought about who had told Tae-sung that his attention was elsewhere. He ran names through the inventory of his mind. The people who knew about the logistics restructure. The people who could have passed that information outward. The people whose loyalty he had assumed rather than tested. He was still running that inventory when his headlights moved across something that was not the road. He said, "Stop." Quietly. The way he said everything important. The driver stopped immediately. She had been on the ground for 22 minutes by the time he found her. 22 minutes of January cold pressing through her coat, and through the layers beneath it, and into her bones. 22 minutes of contractions arriving harder and faster and closer together than they had any right to arrive at 7 months. 22 minutes of a call to emergency services that was still technically connected, but whose dispatcher had told her help was coming without being able to tell her how long coming would take. 22 minutes of being completely, deliberately, precisely alone on a road that someone had chosen for exactly that reason. Her name was Adiz Okafor, 28 years old. Nigerian, born in Lagos, raised partly in London after her father's business, took the family abroad for 4 years, transplanted to Seoul 3 years ago for reasons that had made complete sense at the time and had since become considerably more complicated. She had a voice that people described as warm before they described anything else about her. Dark eyes that held the specific steadiness of a woman who had been through enough to stop being startled by difficulty. A mind that worked methodically and quickly, that had built real things in this city from nothing except patience and trust, and the willingness to sit in strangers' offices for 3 hours and listen before she ever asked for anything. She was 7 months pregnant, alone, on a road that should not have been on her itinerary tonight. The call had come at 9:30. A woman's voice, measured and professional, telling her there was an urgent matter concerning her work visa that required immediate attention. An emergency processing window, tonight only, at an address in the Mapo district. If she missed it, her status would be flagged for review, and the review process could take months. The timing was designed to produce a specific feeling, which was that missing it was not an option. Adiz had known it felt wrong. She had known it in the way that the body knows things before the mind catches up, a particular unease in the stomach that she had learned over 28 years to pay attention to. She had told herself she was being careful as she wrote down the address. She had told herself she was being sensible as she put on her coat. She had tried to call a taxi. The first app told her 40 minutes. She told herself she would walk partway and flag one down. She told herself to trust her instincts and then did the opposite of that, which is the particular cruelty of instinct when the thing you are afraid of is losing something you cannot afford to lose. The address was a building with a padlocked metal door that had clearly not been opened in weeks. No emergency processing window. No office. Nothing but darkness and the river and the city's night sounds and the dawning, sickening understanding of what this actually was. She called the number back. Disconnected. She searched the address. Nothing. She tried 3 taxis. The first 2 calls dropped. The third told her 45 minutes. She started walking. She had been walking for 20 minutes when the first contraction hit. Not the practice kind. Not the slow, negotiable kind that arrives with enough warning to breathe through politely. The sudden kind. The kind that takes the floor without knocking. That moves through the body like a current that does not ask permission. She stopped. She pressed her back against a low concrete wall and breathed through it. And the pain eased, and she kept moving because stopping was not an option and the nearest lights were ahead, and the only direction available was forward. The second contraction came harder. She was on the stretch of road that runs beside the river, the kind of road that carries reasonable traffic during the day and almost none after 11 at night. The nearest lights were further away than she had calculated because the cold had gotten into her thinking and was making distances dishonest. She kept walking. The third contraction brought her down. Not violently. More like a controlled descent. Her body making a decision her mind had not quite authorized yet, lowering her carefully to the ground against the concrete barrier at the edge of the road. She sat with one hand braced behind her and one hand pressed flat against her stomach, and she breathed. Carefully. Deliberately. One breath at a time, which is the only number that matters when the larger number is too frightening to count. She did not allow herself to think about what would happen if no one came. Because if she started thinking about that, she would stop being able to function. And functioning was the only option she had. Her phone was at 28%. The emergency call was still connected. The dispatcher was still there, voice steady and professional, telling her to stay where she was, telling her someone was coming, telling her to keep talking. She kept talking. She stayed where she was. The road was empty in both directions, and the cold pressed in from everywhere. And the only warmth available was the small, stubborn warmth of her own body curled around the life inside it. This is what someone had planned for her. This exact thing. And it almost worked. Siwon's headlights moved across her at exactly the moment the dispatcher on her phone said, "I need you to stay with me," which is the thing dispatchers say when the silence on the other end is beginning to change quality. He said, "Stop." The driver stopped. There was a woman on the ground against the concrete barrier at the edge of the road. Her hand was pressed to her stomach. She was looking directly at the headlights with the expression of someone who has been alone in the dark long enough that light requires a moment of verification before it can be trusted as real. His security man in the passenger seat had his hand inside his jacket before the car fully stopped. Siwon said, "Leave it." He got out. The cold hit him with the full authority of a sole January night. He walked the distance between the car and the woman without hurrying, because hurrying communicates panic and panic communicates that the situation is worse than it is, and the situation did not need to be made worse than it was. He crouched down in front of her. She looked at him. Her eyes were steady in a way that cost her something visible. He could see the effort of it, the specific compression of someone holding their composure in place with both hands, because letting go was not something she had decided to do. He had looked at enough people under extreme pressure to read that very precisely. He said, "How long have you been here?" She said, "Long enough." Her voice was even. The voice of someone who had decided, sometime in the last 22 minutes, that the only viable approach to this situation was to treat it as a problem with a solution. He said, "Can you stand?" She said she was not sure. He reached out and placed his hand under her elbow, not gripping, not pulling, simply offering the support and letting her decide what to do with it. She used it. She shifted her weight and the movement brought on the pain again, and she made a sound, barely audible, the kind that escapes a fraction of a second before a person manages to close the door on it. His jaw tightened. Something moved behind his eyes that was not sympathy exactly. Something more precise than sympathy. He said to his driver, "Yonsei Hospital." Now. He said it in the tone that contained the instruction fully. Not a suggestion. Not an update. The complete sentence. His security man started to say something about the time, about a call that was scheduled, about something that needed his attention before midnight. Siwon turned and looked at him. The sentence did not finish. He turned back to the woman. She was looking at him with the expression of someone calculating whether the danger in front of them is greater or lesser than the danger they are currently in. He recognized that calculation. He had seen it on enough faces to understand it precisely. He said, "My name is Kang Siwon. I am going to take you to the hospital. You can verify who I am once we arrive, or you can decide to trust me between now and then. Those are the two options, and both of them are acceptable, but we need to move now." She looked at him for one full second. Her eyes were doing the calculation quickly and completely. Then she said, "Okay." Getting her into the car was not easy. The third time the pain moved through her in the 20 seconds it took to get her settled. He had both hands on her shoulders without having decided to put them there, steadying her, and she gripped his forearm, and the grip was hard in the specific way that tells you exactly how much a person is holding back. He told the driver to go. In the back of the car, Siwon made 3 calls. The first to the hospital, not with his name, but with a specific phrase that people who understood his reach received as a complete instruction, ensuring a team would be waiting at the entrance. The second to Park Juno, brief, telling him the Taesung meeting was being pushed to tomorrow morning. No explanation. The third call he held his phone and thought about making, and then decided he did not need to make it because there was nothing actionable in it yet. Beside him, the woman, Adiz, had her head tilted back against the seat. Her eyes were closed. Her hand was still pressed flat against her stomach. Her other hand rested loose in her lap. She was breathing in the measured, deliberate way of someone who has decided that breathing is the only job right now and is doing it with complete attention. He looked at her. Not quickly. He looked at her the way he very rarely looked at anything, which was fully, without the operational overlay that usually sat between his eyes and whatever they rested on. She was not beautiful in any way his world would have named first or found immediately useful. She was something more specific than that. The kind of face that carries questions without asking them. The kind of stillness that suggests depth rather than emptiness. The way still water is different from shallow water. He looked away. He told himself he had simply never sat this close to someone in this much difficulty without being the cause of it. He almost believed that. Outside, Seoul moved past the windows in its ordinary, oblivious way. Inside the car, something that had no business being present in the life of Kang Siwon had just arrived. It had not announced itself. It had not asked permission. It had simply settled in quietly, the way significant things do, and begun. If you felt that and you are not subscribed yet, fix that right now. Hit the subscribe button, drop a comment telling me where you are watching from, and stay because what happens next is going to have you forgetting to breathe. We are only at the beginning, besties. Only at the beginning. The hospital moved fast for Siwon. It always did. A team was waiting at the entrance exactly as ordered. Doctor, 2 nurses, wheelchair, the specific efficiency of people who had been told clearly and early what was expected and understood that expectations in this context were not flexible. Adiz was taken in and Siwon stood at the entrance for a moment in the cold before following at a careful distance. Because he was not family. He was not anything. And the calculus of hovering over a stranger in a maternity emergency was not something he had any existing framework for. He sat in a chair in the corridor outside the examination room. He waited. His phone had 4 messages from Juno, all operational, all things that in any other circumstance would have received immediate responses. He read them. He put his phone face down on his knee. His security man stood 3 feet away with the professional stillness of someone whose job required invisibility. 20 minutes passed. A nurse came out with the careful expression of someone approaching a situation she had not fully mapped yet. He said, "How is she?" The nurse said, "Stable. Warning contractions." The baby was under stress, but not in immediate danger. She would need to stay overnight for monitoring. He said, "She has no one with her?" The nurse hesitated. She said the patient had attempted several calls, but had not yet reached anyone. He said, "Tell her she can stay as long as she needs. The costs are covered." The nurse looked at him with an expression, trying very hard not to be the expression it actually was. He said, "And no one outside medical staff enters that room without her explicit approval." No one. The nurse said she understood. He sat back down. He was not entirely sure why he had added the last instruction. It had not been a planned sentence. It had arrived from somewhere in him that did not usually surface during operational hours, the part that had understood, at some point before he became what he was, exactly what it felt like to be in a strange place in pain with no one coming. He looked at the ceiling of the hospital corridor. Very ordinary fluorescent lighting. He sat with that for a while. Then he pulled out his phone. Not for Juno's messages. He opened a search. He looked up the address she had been sent to. He stared at the result for a long moment. An empty commercial property. Vacant for 8 months. No registered business activity. No emergency visa processing. No government office. Nothing. The building was entirely dark. Had been for months. He closed the search. He sat very still in that hospital corridor with the ordinary fluorescent light above him and thought about the specific architecture of what had just happened. A phone call to a pregnant woman at night. A false address across the city. A route that took her along the river where the road was empty and the lights were sparse and the cold was significant and help was far enough away that by the time it arrived it would have been too late. Someone had designed that evening. Someone had designed it knowing who she was and what her circumstances were and what the January temperature beside the Han River would do to a woman who was 7 months pregnant and had been walking for 40 minutes. This was not a prank. This was not a warning. This was a removal. Siwon sat in the hospital chair and the operational part of his mind, the part that had been running the syndicate for 11 years without a significant error, began moving in a direction that was entirely separate from his scheduled evening. Something else moved with it. Something less organized. Something that, if he had been a different kind of man, he might have called anger. He called Juno. He said, "I need you to pull a full background file. Woman named Adiz Okafor. Employment, visa chain, housing, associations, everything. I need it by morning." Juno was quiet for 1 second. 1 second was Juno's version of a long pause. He said, "I will have it." Siwon said, "And Juno?" Juno said yes. Siwon said, "Who told Taesung my attention was elsewhere?" Another pause. Juno said, "I am still working on that." Siwon said, "Work faster." He put the phone down and looked at the door of the examination room and did not move from that chair for the rest of the night. She came out of the examination room the next morning looking like a woman who had spent the night deciding how to carry something heavy and had arrived at an approach. She was in a hospital gown with her hair loose around her face and a careful composure that he recognized as composure that was costing something. She stopped when she saw him still in the corridor chair. She looked at him for a moment. She said, "You stayed." He said yes. She said, "You did not have to." He said, "I know." The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the specific silence of two people who have not yet decided what kind of conversation this is. She said, "Kang Siwon." She said it the way people say a name they have encountered in a context that just collided with a new one, placing it carefully against what they know and seeing if it still holds its shape. He said, "You know the name." She said, "I have been in Seoul for 3 years." He looked at her carefully. He said, "Does it change what happened last night?" She thought about that. Not quickly. He could see the thinking, the careful, honest process of it in her face. Then she said, "You put me in the car and brought me here. I do not think who you are outside of that changes what you did inside it." He said nothing. She said, "My name is Adiz. Adiz Okafor." She said it with the particular weight of a woman who has spent time in places where her name gets abbreviated without permission and has decided that the full version is the only version on offer. He said Adiz. She looked at him when he said it. Something small moved across her face. The precise expression of a person whose name has been said correctly by someone they did not expect to say it correctly. He said, "The address you were sent to last night." He paused. I looked it up. Her eyes changed. Not fear. Something more precise. The specific expression of a person whose instinct, the one they dismissed when they put on their coat, has just come back to them fully formed. She said it was empty. He said, "It has been empty for 8 months." She looked at him for a long moment. She said, "Who would do that?" He said, "That is the question I am going to find the answer to." She said, That is not your problem. He said, it became my problem when I found you on that road. She looked at him. He looked back. Neither of them looked away for longer than was strictly conversational. She said, I need to make some calls. He said, of course. He stood. He said, when you are discharged, do not go home alone. She said, I am not someone who needs to be told what to do. He said, I know. That is not what I am doing. I am telling you that whoever arranged last night may have expected a different outcome. And when they discover they did not get it, they will make a different plan. He paused. I would prefer you were not alone when that happens. She was quiet. He said, I will be outside if you need anything. He left. He stood in the corridor, and he called Juno. He said, where is the file? Juno said, 20 minutes. He said, I will be in the car. Park Juno arrived at the hospital entrance at 7:45 with a tablet and the expression of a man who has been up since 3 in the morning and found things he was not entirely expecting to find. They sat in the back of the car. Juno opened the file. Adiz Okafor. 3 years in Seoul on a work visa sponsored by a company called BOM Trade, Import-Export, office in Yeongdongpo. The company looked clean on paper. Juno had gone one level beneath the paper. BOM Trade was a subsidiary of a holding company called SK Horizon Group. SK Horizon Group was connected, through 2 careful degrees of corporate separation, to a man named Choi Man-soo. Siwon looked at that name and was very still. Choi Man-soo was not a street name. He was what Siwon's world referred to as a clean hand, a formal businessman who maintained very careful public distance from anything that could be described as criminal, but who occasionally required services the formal economy could not provide. Siwon had transacted with him twice, 3 years ago. Both times had been simple and brief and had left no mark. A debt recovered. A negotiation completed. They had not spoken since. Siwon said, what is Mansoo's current position? Juno said, expanding. Aggressively. 3 acquisitions in 18 months. He is running for a seat on the Seoul Business Council in the spring. He has profile now. He has visibility. Siwon said, and her role at BOM Trade. What does she actually do? Juno said, she manages the West African import corridor. She is apparently exceptional at it. She built the relationships herself, personally, before the company acquired them. He paused. She did the work. She just does not own the result. Siwon said, does she know about the Mansoo connection? Juno said, almost certainly not. Siwon was quiet for a moment. He looked at the window at a Seoul morning going about its business, indifferent and bright. He said, who benefits if she is gone? Juno said, the corridor would need a new manager. Someone placed rather than grown. Someone who did not know the history of the relationships and therefore could not ask the wrong questions about how they were being used. Siwon said, how they are being used. Juno looked at him. Siwon said, find out what is moving through that corridor that she did not build it to carry. I want to know by tonight. Juno said, I will find it. Siwon said, one more thing. Juno waited. Siwon said, the call she received last night. The woman's voice. The scripted wording. Someone paid for that to happen. Find the person who made that call. Not the phone. The person. Juno said, that will take a few days. Siwon said, then begin now. He got out of the car and went back inside the hospital. She was being discharged at noon. He found her in the corridor, dressed again in her dark coat. Her natural hair pulled back now, her hands moving through the discharge paperwork with the focused efficiency of a woman who processes things by moving through them rather than around them. Her Korean friend, Soo Bin, had arrived, slim and dark-haired, and watching Siwon with the specific expression of someone trying to calculate threat level while maintaining the appearance of not doing so. Adiz saw him coming. She did not adjust her expression. He said, a moment. She passed the paperwork to Soo Bin and stepped slightly to the side. He said, quietly, I have begun looking into what happened last night. I have a direction. I do not have the full picture yet, but I have enough to tell you that last night was not random. It was arranged, specifically for you, by someone who knew your schedule, your visa situation, and who calculated that the cold in the distance and the hour would be sufficient. She looked at him. Something moved through her eyes, a cold recognition, the specific quality of a person who suspected something and is now having it confirmed. She said, why are you telling me this now? He said, because you need to know that going home and resuming your routine as normal is not safe. She said, and what exactly are you suggesting? He said, nothing that removes your choices. He looked at her steadily. I am suggesting you vary your routine. Do not go anywhere alone at night. Do not respond to communications from numbers you do not recognize. And if anything feels wrong, anything at all, I need you to tell me. She said, and why would I tell you? He said, because I am the only person in this city who is currently treating what happened to you last night as the serious matter it is. He paused. And because whoever planned that road is still planning. She held his gaze for a long moment. She said, how do you know I can trust you? He said, you got into my car last night. She said, I was on the ground in January with a baby in distress. My judgment was not at full capacity. He said, your judgment was completely intact. You calculated the risk, and you made a decision. He looked at her. I am asking you to make a different calculation now, with more information. She was quiet. Subin appeared at her elbow, and said, quietly, Ada. Adiz did not look away from Siwon. She said, I will think about what you said. He said, that is enough. He held her eyes for one more moment. Then he stepped back and let her walk toward the exit. He stood in the hospital corridor and watched her go and felt something in his chest that was not operational and was not useful and was not something he had any prepared response to. He went to find Juno. The Taesung meeting happened at 9 that same morning in a warehouse on the south side of the Han River, the kind of building that exists in every city in the world as a container for whatever that city needs to not look at directly. Oh Taesung was 41, thickly built, expensive suit slightly too tight across the shoulders, the careful composure of a man who had been frightened since the meeting was scheduled and had prepared very precisely not to show it. He had 2 men with him. Siwon had Juno and 2 others. The numbers communicated what they needed to communicate. They sat across a table. Taesung said, I understand there is a discussion to be had. Siwon said, you moved 3 operations into the Mapo district. He said it the way he stated things that were not in dispute, without warmth, without preamble. Taesung said, there was a gap. I was addressing a practical need. Siwon said, there was no gap. There was a restructure. That restructure did not constitute an invitation. Taesung said, the boundaries in this city have always been somewhat fluid. Siwon was quiet. Then he leaned forward. The room temperature dropped in the specific way it dropped when Siwon leaned forward. Taesung's jaw tightened. His 2 men did not move, but the quality of their stillness changed. The fluid becomes fixed, Siwon said, the moment I say it does. You knew that. You moved anyway. He paused. So the question I am interested in is not the boundary. The question is who told you my attention was elsewhere. Something moved across Taesung's face. A very small thing. A slight adjustment around the eyes that lasted less than a second. Siwon filed it. Taesung said, I made an independent assessment of the situation. Siwon said, you made an independent assessment that I was distracted. He sat back. That is a specific conclusion, Taesung. Not the kind a man arrives at independently. He looked at him. Who gave you that conclusion? Taesung said, I received no outside information. Siwon looked at him for a long moment. He said, pull the 3 operations out of Mapo by Friday. Make a payment to the logistics division. Juno has the figure. And we will consider this a misunderstanding born of poor judgment. Taesung said, and if I find those terms difficult? Siwon stood. He said, they are not difficult, Taesung. That is the thing about them. He left without waiting for a response. In the car, Siwon said to Juno, he was told I was distracted. Someone gave him that. Juno said yes. Siwon said, someone inside the organization. Juno said nothing, which was its own answer. Siwon said, I want you to think carefully about who knew about the logistics restructure in enough detail to make it sound like distraction. Think carefully. Take your time. And tell me tonight. Juno said, I will. Siwon looked out the window at the river going past. The same river. The same road. He thought about a phone that went to a disconnected tone. A building with a padlocked door. A woman on the ground with her hand on her stomach. He thought about Taesung's eyes doing that small, careful thing when the question was asked. He thought about the file. About Choi Man-soo and his glass office building and his coming seat on the Seoul Business Council. He thought about who inside his world would find it useful for Man-soo to know when Siwon was distracted. He filed that thought in the place where he kept things he was not yet ready to act on, but could not afford to lose. That evening, Adiz texted him. She had not planned to. She had sat in her small, warm apartment, the Lagos skyline photograph on the wall behind her, the pregnancy book on the couch beside her with its bookmark at the chapter on the 3rd trimester. Sue been in the kitchen making tea with the focused energy of someone who is doing something useful because they cannot fix the actual problem, and she had looked at the card he had pressed into her hand at the hospital entrance. A phone number, written in a hand that was clean and precise and gave nothing away. She had looked at it for a long time. Then she typed, "I got home safely. The car outside my building is yours, I assume." He responded in under a minute. "Yes. Is that acceptable?" She looked at that word. Acceptable. Not is that all right. Not sorry for the intrusion. Acceptable. As though he already understood that the question was about her terms and not his consideration. She typed, "For now." He typed, "Good." A pause. She typed, "I looked up your name properly tonight." He typed, and she typed, "And I understand better what you are." She paused. "I am not sure yet what to do with that." He typed, "You do not have to do anything with it tonight." Another pause. Longer. She typed, "Why does someone like you stop for a stranger on a road?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he typed, "I do not know yet." That is an honest answer. She read that 3 times. She typed, "That might be the most unsettling thing you have said to me." He typed, "I know." She did not respond for several minutes. He did not push. He sat in his apartment at the minimalist desk in the room that had never quite become a home and looked at his phone and waited in the same stillness he brought to everything. She typed, "Good night, Kang Siwon." He typed, "Good night, Adiz." He put the phone down. He looked at the ceiling. He thought about the way she said Adiz with the emphasis on the second syllable, the way she had said it when she introduced herself, with the weight of a person who has decided that the full version is the only version available. He thought about a lot of things he did not usually think about. He did not examine them. But he did not push them away either, which was new. Like this video right now, if you can already feel what is happening between these two people, and you are not sure whether to be excited or terrified. Because, besties, I need you to understand something. The danger in this story is not just outside. It is also the thing growing inside a man who built his entire world on never feeling anything he could not control. Comment below and tell me, do you trust him? Does she? Let's talk about it. Juno's information on the corridor arrived 2 days later. Not 3 days. 2. Because Siwon had said tonight and Juno had taken that seriously, and when Juno could not fully deliver by tonight, he had sent a partial report at midnight and the full version at 6 the next morning, which was Juno's version of moving as fast as was humanly possible while maintaining the accuracy that made his information worth having. Siwon read it at 6:15 at the dark desk in the apartment that had never felt like a home. With coffee he had made himself because the staff did not arrive until 8, and he had been awake since 4. The West African corridor that Adiz had built over 3 years of personal relationships, trust built meeting by meeting, sitting in offices in Lagos and Accra and Abuja, and listening before she ever asked for anything. That corridor was now carrying more than she had built it to carry. The legitimate trade was still there. The import goods she had negotiated were still moving. But running alongside it, inside the customs relationships she had built on the strength of her personal reputation, was a second stream. Identity documents. Travel papers. Specifically for individuals who needed to move across West African borders through channels that would not look too carefully at who was traveling, because those channels had been trained to trust the source. The source was her face. Her name. Her 3 years of relationship building. She had no idea. The operation had been running for 14 months. The volume was significant. Juno estimated it was generating 8 to 10 times what the legitimate corridor produced. It was entirely invisible because the trust it moved through was real. She had made it real. And someone had reached into it from behind and used it for something she would never in her life have agreed to. Siwon put the report down. He sat with it. He had been in this world for 11 years. He had seen people used for their reputations before. He had seen operations built inside other operations. He had seen the specific coldness of a calculation that treats a human being as infrastructure rather than a person. He had done versions of it himself, smaller versions, he told himself, though he was no longer entirely sure of the arithmetic on that. But this, a woman who had built something real from nothing, who had sat in strangers' offices and earned trust over years, who had built a corridor that was supposed to be about trade and connection and the specific work of someone who believed that relationships were what made business human. Someone had taken all of that and hollowed it out from behind and filled it with something ugly and had done it so carefully that she would have worked inside it for years without ever seeing it. And when she had started to see it, When she had started pulling invoices and asking questions that did not have comfortable answers, instead of shutting the operation down and finding another route, they had decided to remove her. A pregnant woman. In January, on a road beside the river, he picked up his phone and called Juno. He said, Kim Dong-hyun, Mansu's personal assistant. I need him brought in tonight. Quietly. No mark, no scene, no problem. He comes in, and he sits down, and he tells me everything he knows. Juno said, and if he is reluctant? Siwon said, tell him Choi Mansu is not in the room. I am. He will understand. He put the phone down. He sat for a moment more. Then he texted Adiz. He typed, I need to speak with you tomorrow. In person. I have the information I promised you. She responded after a few minutes. She typed, how bad is it? He typed, it is significant. But none of it is your fault. I need you to know that before tomorrow. She was quiet for a while. Then she typed, you are telling me tonight instead of tomorrow. He typed, because tonight is when you need to hear it. A longer pause. She typed, okay. Tomorrow. I will make tea. He looked at that for a moment. I will make tea. The specific domestic warmth of it in the context of what he was about to tell her. He typed, I will be there by 9. He put the phone down. Outside his window, Seoul was doing its dark and indifferent nighttime things. Lights and movement, and the endless hum of a city running on its own logic, unaware of and unconcerned with the particular weight of what was sitting in his chest that he had not yet found a name for. Kim Dong-hyun arrived at the warehouse that evening, having clearly spent several hours preparing how to act when this moment arrived. He had settled on composed. He managed it for approximately 4 minutes. He was 29. Slim, well-dressed, sharp features, the careful, watchful eyes of someone who had spent years reading rooms quickly. He sat in the chair Juno indicated. He clasped his hands on the table. He said, I know who you are. Siwon sat across from him and said, I know you know. That is precisely why you are here. Because you know who I am, and you still arranged what you arranged. He paused. I am curious about the logic of that. Dong-hyun said, I was following instructions. Siwon said, whose? Dong-hyun said, I am not able to tell you that. The room was very still. Juno stood at the wall. 2 others stood at the door. Siwon said, let me explain something to you. I am not asking because I do not already know the answer. I already know the answer. I am asking because the version of this evening where you tell me yourself is significantly more comfortable for you than the version where you don't, and I proceed on what I already know without your input. Dong-hyun looked at him. The calculation was visible in his face. The arithmetic of 2 frightening men and a choice between them. Siwon said, Choi Mansu is not in this room. I am. Something settled in Dong-hyun's expression. The specific settling of a decision that has been made. He said, Mansu wanted her gone. He was careful about how he said it. He kept repeating it. Not hurt. He kept saying not hurt. Just frightened enough to leave. She had started asking questions about the company ownership structure. She had started pulling invoices. She was getting close to seeing the chain. Siwon said, she built the corridor. Dong-hyun said yes. And she was beginning to understand that the thing she built was being used for things she did not build it for. Siwon said, the document stream. Dong-hyun looked at him. He said, you already know about that. Siwon said, I know about that. Tell me what else I do not know. Dong-hyun hesitated for a moment. Then he said, the documents are not just for ordinary people trying to move across borders. Some of them, not all, some of them are being used by individuals that Mansu has arrangements with. People who need to move without being identified. He paused. The kinds of people that, if you follow the chain, connect to networks that are significantly larger and significantly more dangerous than Mansu himself. The room was very quiet. Siwon said, Mansu is not the top of this. Dong-hyun said, Mansu is the middle of this. He paused. He thinks he is the top. He is not the top. Siwon looked at him for a long moment. Something shifted in his thinking. The shape of what he was dealing with becoming larger than it had appeared from one level up. He stood. He said to Juno, make him comfortable. Nothing happens to him. He is here until I decide what use his information has. He walked to the door. One of his men said, Boss, what is above Mansu? Siwon stopped. He said, that is what we are going to find out. He left. He drove to Adiz's apartment building and sat in the car outside it for longer than he had planned. Not because he was unsure about telling her. He had decided to tell her everything, completely and without softening, because she was a woman who had asked for a real answer and she deserved nothing less than that. He was sitting outside because he was thinking about what the information was going to do to her. Not the danger part. The other part. The part where she understood that the work she was proud of, the corridor she had built relationship by relationship over 3 years, had been used as the infrastructure of something she would never have put her name to. He thought about Yemi Osei in Accra, 63 years old, 40 years in trade, who had trusted her because she had sat in his office and listened to him talk about his grandchildren without once looking at her phone. He thought about all of the people like Yemi Osei who had extended trust to Adi specifically, personally, and whose trust had then been borrowed by someone else for purposes they would never have consented to. He thought about what that would feel like to a person who built things with her hands. He got out of the car. She opened the door in a yellow knit jumper and bare feet, her hair loose around her face, the apartment behind her warm and smelling of tea and something cooking that had a spiced warmth he did not have a name for. She looked at him with the specific expression of a person who has spent the preceding hours preparing for a difficult conversation and has arrived at readiness, while quietly hoping they are wrong about its difficulty. He came inside. The apartment was small and deeply personal in the way spaces become personal when someone has spent years turning them into a home in a country that was not theirs. Photographs on the wall. A woman who looked like her mother probably. Younger people who were probably siblings. A Lagos skyline at dusk, all amber and dense, the specific warmth of a city at the end of a day. Books stacked with the slight disorder of books being read rather than displayed. A small wooden bowl of clementines. A baby named Book on the couch with a bookmark in it. He sat at the small kitchen table. She set tea in front of him and sat across from him and said, "Tell me." He told her. All of it. The BOM trade file and the chain that led to Mansu. The corridor. What had been moving through it for 14 months. The document stream. The individuals that stream connected to. Kim Dong-hyun and the phone call and the fake address. What had been done and who had ordered it and why. He told her without softening. Without protective gaps. She had asked for a real answer, and he gave her the complete one. She listened without interrupting. Her hands were around her mug. Her face was very still in the way that still water is different from empty water. When he finished, there was a silence. Then she said, "They used Yemi." He said, "I am sorry." She said, "Yemi Osei. He is 63 years old. He has been in trade for 40 years. He trusted me because I sat in his office for 3 hours and I listened to him talk about his grandchildren, and I did not look at my phone once." She paused. They used him. Her voice did not break, but something around her eyes did something. A tightening and then a release. The specific physiognomy of grief being held exactly where it needs to be held so it does not overflow. She said, "And they used my baby." She pressed her hand flat against her stomach. "They calculated on me not surviving that road. They put me on a road in January because they knew what the cold would do to a woman at 7 months and alone, and they calculated that by the time help arrived it would not matter." He said yes. She said, "And the baby." He said yes. She was very still. He waited. He did not fill the silence. He let it be what it was, which was a woman sitting inside the full weight of what had been done to her, with her hand on her stomach, taking the inventory of it without looking away. Then she said, "Who is above Mansu?" He looked at her. This surprised him slightly, not the intelligence of it. He had expected the intelligence. The speed of it. The way she had moved directly from the grief to the operational question. He said, "We do not know yet. We know Mansu is not the top." She said, "Which means whoever is above him still has a reason to want me gone." He said yes. She said, "Which means last night was not the last plan. It was the first one." He said yes. She nodded. One slow, precise nod. The nod of a woman taking information on board and filing it accurately. She said, "What do you want from me?" He said, "Nothing." She looked at him. He said, "Nothing. Not the corridor, not the contacts, not the information you have. This is not a transaction." She said, "Then why are you doing this?" He said, "Because someone put you on a road in January with the intention of killing you and your child." He said it without drama, without performance, the way a fact is stated. And I am not a person who learns that and moves on from it. That is simply not how I am made. She looked at him for a long time. Those steady dark eyes reading him with the same methodical precision she applied to everything. She said, "You are going to go after Mansu." He said yes. She said, "And whoever is above Mansu." He said yes. She said, That is dangerous. He said, I know what danger looks like. She said, I know you do. She paused. I am saying it is dangerous for you specifically. Not for me. For you. Because men like Mansu do not reach the position he is in without knowing how to make problems disappear and how to make the people who create problems disappear with them. And if there is someone above him who is larger still. She stopped. Her hand pressed harder on her stomach. He said, I know what I am doing. She said, and I am the reason it starts. He said, you are not the reason. He is the reason. The person above him is the reason. You are the person they were trying to remove. He paused. There is a significant difference. She said, you know what I mean. He said, yes. I know what you mean. He leaned forward slightly. But I need you to hear this. Whatever happens, I am not going to leave what was done to you unanswered. I am not capable of that. You can tell me it is not my decision to make, and you will be correct. And I am still going to do it. She held his gaze. She said, very quietly, why does it feel like you are telling me something else at the same time? The apartment was warm around them. Seoul moved through its morning outside the window, ordinary and indifferent. Inside, in the specific air between a kitchen table and two people who had not expected to be sitting at it together, something that had been building for days without permission was very close to the surface. He said, because I am. She did not look away. She said, what are you telling me? He said, that I have not thought about anything the way I think about you in longer than I can say comfortably. He said it the way he said everything, which was directly, without performance, the way a man states something he has decided to stop being careful about. He said that this started as something I could explain and has become something I cannot. That is not strategy. It is not manipulation. It is simply what is true, and I have decided not to pretend otherwise. She was quiet. He said, I am not asking you anything. I am not expecting anything. I know what I am, and I know what my world is, and I know that a person looking clearly at those two facts would make a very sensible decision to maintain a significant distance. She said, I am a sensible person. He said, I know. She said, I have a baby coming in 8 weeks. He said, I know. She said, I build things with my hands. With trust and patience and time. That is the only way I know how to do anything. She paused. And someone took what I built and used it for something I would never have put my name to. He said, I know. She said, and the person who did that is still out there. Still above Mansu. Still, as you just said, with reasons to want me gone. He said, yes. She said, and you are still sitting at my kitchen table. He said, yes. She looked at him for a long moment. Something in her eyes moved through the calculation and arrived somewhere else. Not a decision exactly. Not yet. The thing that comes just before a decision. The moment where the arithmetic stops and what is actually in the room takes over. She said, give me time. He said, as much as you need. She said, and in the meantime. He said, I will find out who is above Mansu. I will keep you safe. And I will stay out of your way unless you tell me not to. She said, and if I tell you not to. He said, then I won't. She nodded. She looked down at her tea. Then she looked up. She said, I want to tell you something about myself. He waited. She said, when I was 22, my father told me that the most dangerous thing a woman can do is love a powerful man. He said powerful men do not know how to be loved. They only know how to be served or feared. She paused. I told him he was wrong. He said, show me a powerful man who proved me wrong, and I will believe you. The room was very quiet. Siwon said, what did you say to him? She said, I said I had not met that man yet. He looked at her. She looked back. Neither of them said anything else. But in the warm apartment with the Lego skyline on the wall and the baby name book on the couch and the tea going cold between them, something that had been a current became a tide. Quiet and inevitable and not asking permission. He was the first to look away. He said, I should go. There are things I need to put in motion. She said, I know. He stood. He picked up his coat. At the door he stopped. He said, at ease. She said, yes. He said, your father's saying. The powerful man. He paused. I do not know if I can be him, but I would like to try. He said it the way he said the things that cost him something, which was directly and without theater, as though honesty was the only currency he had decided was worth spending. She looked at him for a long moment. She said, that is the most honest thing anyone has said to me in this city. He left. He stood in the corridor outside her door for 3 seconds longer than was necessary. Then he walked to the lift and pressed the button and stood with his hands in his pockets and his jaw set, and something in his chest that he had stopped pretending was not there. That evening, Juno called. Siwon was at his desk. He answered on the first ring. Juno said, "I have been going deeper into the Mansu file like you asked." He paused. "There is something here that I did not expect to find." Siwon said, "What?" Juno said, "The person who told Taesung that your attention was elsewhere." He paused again. "I found the connection." Siwon said, "Who is it?" Juno said, "I need you to see this in person. There is a document, a communication trail. It is not something I can describe on a phone. I need you to see it yourself." Siwon said, "I am coming now." "Where are you?" Juno gave the address. Siwon was already standing, already reaching for his coat. He called his driver. He said now. He was in the car in 4 minutes. Moving through Seoul at night, toward Juno's location, the city sliding past the window in its ordinary way, oblivious to everything. His phone rang again. "Juno." He answered. Juno said, "Boss, there is something else." He said it in a voice Siwon had not heard from him in years. Not afraid exactly. Something adjacent to afraid. The voice of a man who has found something that changes the size of what he thought he was looking at. Siwon said, "I am 10 minutes away." Juno said, "It is about the person above Mansu." He paused. "Boss, it is someone you know." The car was moving through an underpass. Siwon's hand tightened on the phone. He said, "Who?" Juno started to say the name. And then there was a sound. A single sharp sound that was not traffic and was not the city and was not anything that belonged on a phone call between two men talking about documents. Then silence. Not the comfortable silence of a paused conversation. The other kind. The kind that has a weight to it. The kind that means something has happened that cannot be unhappened. Siwon said, "Juno." "Nothing." He said it again. "Nothing." He looked at his phone. The call was still connected. The timer was still running. But the line was completely, absolutely, irreversibly silent. He said to his driver, "Drive faster." His driver drove faster. And in the back of the car, Kang Siwon, who had not been afraid of anything in 11 years, felt something cold move through him that had nothing to do with the January night outside the window. Someone had just found out what Juno found. And someone had just made a decision. The question tearing through his mind as the car accelerated through the dark was not what had happened. He already knew what had happened. The question was who. Because the person above Mansu was someone he knew. And that meant the person who had just silenced Juno was someone who had been inside his world all along. Sitting at his tables, eating his food, speaking his language, and reporting everything back. Subscribe right now. Do not leave this channel without subscribing because part 2 is coming, and when it drops, the name Juno was about to say is going to change everything you thought you understood about this story. Who is the traitor? Who fired that shot? Is Juno alive? Drop your theories in the comments. I am reading every single one. Like this video, share it with everyone you know who loves a story that makes it impossible to breathe, and tell me where in the world you are watching from. I see you. I see all of you. Part 2 is coming. Do not go anywhere. End of part 1.